Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to a new video. As you can see, parts are stacked high on the desk. That can only mean one thing: PC build time. This one, we're going to be aiming towards 1440p high gaming, potentially even ultra settings on certain games. I'm going to run you through different benchmarks at the end once we've completed it. It's going to be epic. I'm really looking forward to this one. We've got parts that have kind of been sent over by Gigabyte, Patriot and Cougar Gaming. As you can see, there's some pretty tasty hardware on the desk. We're going to base this off the Ryzen 5 5600X as our processor with a RTX 3070 from Gigabyte as our graphics card. But we're going to be doing lots of stuff with this card as well, so make sure you get subscribed and ding the bell so you don't miss any content that's coming up. So what we're going to do is go through the actual build process and take you along for the ride and cover every component as we go and as we need it, rather than kind of covering it all at the start, so it saves a lot of time. And then of course we'll do some benchmarks at the end, which will include Halo Infinite. I'm actually really keen to play that myself, so we'll just try to restrict how much I do so this whole day doesn't turn into a Halo gaming session. But nevertheless, let's get into it and start the build. So here are the first parts we're going to put together. We've got our motherboard, which is the Aorus B550 Elite V2. Now this motherboard you can find for about £100 in the UK, even when it's not on sale, so it's a really great affordable motherboard to use. It's got Gen 4 support. We've got a front port USB-C header on there as well, so if you want to get a case that supports USB-C on the front, that's all ready to go. Really good features, but you know, without any of the additional stuff that you're not going to use, that you just end up paying more money for. For memory, we're going to be using the Viper Steel RGB from Patriot. This is a 16 gig kit of 3600 megahertz, so nice quick transfers. Then our storage is a Viper VPN 100 PCIe M.2. At the time of recording, this has actually been replaced as well by the VPN 110, so just something to note. Features are generally the same though, but this is just now technically an older model. So I'm going to use the box as a little kind of test bench just to assemble this. So let's first lift up the latch for our processor, grab our trusty 5600X and pop this in. It's going to go 190-degree turn clockwise if you're using this board. I think the only other exception to that rule is the EVGA Dart motherboards that have a different design, so they've got the RAM slots at the top. You can also line up the arrows that's on the processor and the motherboard to do it that way. Let's grab our RAM. So we're going to be using slots 2 and 4 for this motherboard for our dual channel RAM. It's generally the same for most motherboards, but just consult the manual just in case it's slightly different. And then we're going to match up the notch with our RAM stick to the DIMM slot and get a nice satisfying click. There we go. Now for our storage, we've got a bit of a decision to make. As you can see, there's a fairly chunky heatsink on this, and we can either take off this cover on our motherboard, put it in the top slot, which is a Gen 4 slot, but of course we're using a Gen 3 drive, so it's not going to make too much difference. We could always leave that cover off, but aesthetic wise, I'd rather leave it there and actually use this slot that's further down. Being that we're using a Gen 3 drive anyway, it's not going to make too much difference. And I think just, you know, for visuals, it's going to look a little bit better down in that slot there. You can get this NVMe in a Gen 4 variant as well, and it's actually easier to take the heatsink off should you buy that version than the one I'm using here. So just something to note. Just hold this down while I put the screw back in. And I have checked, our graphics card will clear this heatsink, so there's nothing to worry about there. So there we go. And let's just do this peel. Voila. So now I think we're going to get our cooler ready, get all the fans and stuff sorted for that, and then we shall move on to our case. So the cooler we're going to be using for this build is the Aqua 360 ARGB from Cougar Gaming. As in the name, it's a 360mm radiator, but they do smaller ones if you're using a slightly different case. So we have all of our parts out here. Of course, we've got the radiator itself with the Cougar, which will light up all us in our ARGB. This goes to a SATA for the pump. Then we've got a little connection, which is 3-pin for our fans. And then that will go to our ARGB. We've actually got a controller on the case, so we can actually put it all into that hub and then do a one cable onto the motherboard. We've got our screws which are going to go through our fans onto the radiator and then mount the radiator into the case. The bracket that we're going to need to swap for our AMD mount. We've got a Daisy Link power cable for the fans. This is for Threadripper if you're going to be using that. That's the plate you're going to need for the actual pump head. Bit of thermal paste, but we're going to use Noctua because that's what I use for every build. Also gives you a better idea for thermals then. We've also got our Intel and TR4 screws, which of course we're not going to need. And then all our AMD mounting is in this bag at the bottom. We've also got a controller for all the RGB, but as we're going to use it addressable, we won't be needing this. So emptying this little bag out, these are the commonly used parts. So even if you're going to mount with Intel, you're still going to need to open this bag. So for example, you'd use 4 for Intel. We're going to need 2 of these, and then these little kind of square brackets. And then that's literally it. It's a little bit more in that bag than we really need, but there we go. So I'm going to take off this plate, which is Intel pre-installed. And we're going to swap it over to our AMD one. I'm going to have this with the kind of latches further up to the top of the block. Then we're going to put these little clips up through with the holes facing outwards, and then just lightly put these thumb screws on for now, because we will be installing them properly in a minute. So there we go, they're ready to mount onto the motherboard, and there is some protective plastic on there that we will need to take off before we install it onto our processor. Don't forget to do that, otherwise your temps are going to be a little bit different from what you expect. So the case we're going to use for this build is the Cougar Gaming Dark Blader X7. You can get it in green, but we've got the black version here. Now this can take a 360 radiator in the top, so we could put this you know, in no problem. But the fan in the back is totally different to what's included in the box. So I'm not too much of a fan of putting it in the roof because the fans aren't going to look the same. So what I think I'm going to do is install 2 of the G-lid fans into the top and then 1 in the back, then put the radiator at the front. Okay, so I have our fans out for our radiator. These are Vortex VA120s from Cougar. This is a G-lid Stellar fan on the right, and it's as close as I can get with what I've got on hand. The actual rubbers are very similar. It's a very similar design actually, just be it that this one, the Stellar's got a bigger ring. Fairly close, but it doesn't match, and it will mean that the lighting is different, so that's why I want to have 2 in the top of the case and 1 in the back, so it all stays relatively uniform. Otherwise it's not going to look the same, and I just can't stand that. So that's what we're going to be doing for this one. These are the Vortex VA120s from Cougar that come with the cooler. Now typically I'd put them on the front, like I said, like that, but being that we're going to put it so they're on the inside, we're going to need to put these around it this way. I also recommend that you look at which way the cables come out of the fan as well, so then you can put it the right way on the radiator to make the cables go around the back of the case, just to make it a lot more neater than if you had it that way and then we're trailing the cable across. So let's get all these lined up. We'll get these all screwed in. Sometimes it can get a wiggle to get it into the hole. So there we go, that's all our fans mounted and all the cables coming off to the left, so it's going to be nice and easy to route those through some holes in the case to the back and get it all nice and cable managed. So now we need to bring in the case and we can mount this in. Now I've taken off the front panel. That actually has an RGB strip in the front as well, so it does have a cable that runs, so just don't pull it off too hard. And then this should be a case of simply slotting in. So I've moved the case around for you to see it a little bit easier, how we're going to actually situate it in the case. Take all the little ties off the cables to make life easier, and then route those through first. I'm going to put the top cables through the top grommet, middle ones through the middle. You can see where this is going, can't you? Lower this in place as we pull our cables through. Then we're going to be using the short ones to mount the radiator to the actual case. It's going to be very pretty clear which ones you're going to be using, as it's only going to go in one place. And there we go. So I've left out 1, 2, 3 and 4. Don't really need it for the, you know, for a 360. But that's now installed. So our power supply for this build is the Cougar Gaming GEX 850. This is a modular gold rated power supply. So we're only going to need to use the cables that we need, and we're not going to have any unnecessary clutter. For example, I think the only extra cable we're going to need to add on is a SATA for our fans and things like that. So that saves all the unnecessary extra cable. So it all comes packaged very well. You get a little bag for this power supply as well. But we're going to take the main bulk of the cables out and get this open. So we've got a PCIe. This is a 6+2 and a 6+2. We're going to need 1 of those for our graphics card. Not going to need any more. We've got our peripheral one, so we're going to need to grab a SATA from here. So this one's got 4 on, that's perfect. Not going to need any more. CPU power, our 8-pin. and then our 24 pin. So if you're using this case exactly, you'll actually get some power supply screws in the case. Now what I'm going to do is get all these cables attached to the power supply before we put it in, just make life a little bit easier. So let's get these cables connected. First of all, the 24 pin motherboard power actually has a different connector on the power supply end, so you're not going to get them muddled up. There's one, and then the extra 10. So our 8 pin actually has a double on the end, so if you do need a motherboard or you're going to do some extreme overclocking and you need that extra 8 pin, it's good to have. This one's just going to go into the 4+4. So top right will do perfectly. SATA, which is going to be SATA and peripheral. Then finally our 6+2s, which will go in the same one as the CPU. So now that's ready, this can go in and we'll run these cables through. So as this has got a filter and there's also a nice bit of clearance between the desk and the case, I'm going to be putting it fan side down. In some cases you'll find you'll need to put it fan side up. If that's the case, you'll generally see a mesh or some kind of cutout so air can get into it. But this is a solid panel in this case, so it needs to go fan side down. And we'll just get this screwed into the back. And there we go, that's that done. So now we can get our motherboard in, and then we're fairly close to being finished. I did feed the 8 pin through, just to make life a little bit easier, as sometimes it can be a bit tricky to get your fingers underneath there. But as we don't actually have a radiator in the top, we should be okay. So as our motherboard doesn't got a cooler that we can grab onto, I'm just going to very carefully lower this into place. Also the standoffs are already installed for an ATX board. You do get some additional ones in the box should you want to use a M-ATX or an ITX for that matter. Commonly not going to use an ITX board on a case this size, but you know, if you do want to, for some wacky reason, you can do it. Put that down into position. I'm going to find our motherboard screws. Again, refer to your manual because it might be different for your certain case. And get this installed. It's worth mentioning as well that the motherboard screws we're using for this case are the same as the ones that you'd use to install any SSDs. The more you know. Okay, so now we can put our cooler on. Don't forget, remove the peel. Now there's no pre-applied thermal paste in this cooler, which is a bit of a shame, but that being said, it is a more affordable 360 cooler, so you know you have to cut some costs somewhere. So I'm going to put a dab of Noctua on the processor. Should be enough. As I said, we've got these little brackets that are going to go around the clips on the board, and then we're going to screw them down. Just get these lined up. That's one, and then that's the other one. So now we can tighten this down. We'll do a little bit one side and a little bit the other. It will straighten itself out as well when it puts some pressure on the actual IHS. So let's undo our twist ties for the cables, and then we'll run these through. Now being that we're going to install fans onto this, there is a little bit of a jumble of cables, but nothing that we can't manage around the back. So I've run those cables along by some fan headers on the motherboard. It's relatively clean really. And then I'm going to plug in the 8 pin. We're going to have to use the longer one and then tuck the extra back through the case. So I've got our extra fans out. We're going to install these as exhausts, so they're going to go that way. And it's also worth noting that the case comes with the screws for these fans as well, so we don't need the ones out of the box. Getting cramp in my fingers. Et voila, so that filter can go back on. And then we'll replace the one in the back, and then we'll get our graphics card in. Okay, so our graphics card is going to be the GeForce RTX 3070 from Gigabyte. This is the Eagle edition with 8 GB of GDR6 memory. So you have to take off the vertical mount to actually get the graphics card in. A bit strange, but we'll go with it. And then it should come out. Strange. So we can now slot this in. There we go. This goes through like that, and then back to there. Screw and bracket goes into that bit. So now we just need to put in our 24 pin front panel I/O stuff, connect all our ARGB up, and we'll see if it boots. So this one here at the very bottom is our splitter cable for our fans for the cooler. So this is going to go to a single motherboard header. So that's kind of one part. And then we've got the ARGB section of it, which is going to basically just daisy chain. So these are just going to go in together. Then we've got our SATA cable, which is going to power our controller, which is underneath here, as well as the pump for our cooler. Then we've got our cable for our graphics card that's going to go through that grommet there, which we'll plug that in on the other side. And then there's our other ARGB stuff here. And then what I shall do is just plug in the cooler onto one, and then we'll do the other fans onto another. And then there's also going to be the front panel that goes into this one here, which will control the lighting strips on the front of the case. Then there's a single header that comes from that, which will then go to our motherboard at the very top, and we can control it in the Gigabyte software. For the other fans that need power, I've got one of these 1 to 3 plug adapters. These are really handy, use these in pretty much every build. You can plug in all of your additional fans. I know there's some more for the extra ones I put in the roof, so there goes another one. Then that will just take up 2 headers on our motherboard rather than 4, so it makes it a lot less cluttered inside the actual case. Yeah, there are some cables, as you can see, that kind of run through, but that's kind of limitations of the case as well. There's only so much we can really do. So we're going to find our CPU fan header, which is at the very top. So these are our 6 and our 8 pins for graphics card. We're going to need 1 8, so I'm going to put this one on the right, and we're going to need a 6, so I shall tuck this underneath, and then maybe cable tie it down just to make it look a bit neater. 24 pin is going to bend over again to go into the 24 pin slot. These cables can be stiff out of the box, but don't be afraid to bend them to get the way you want them. They just need a little bit of training, as they've been sat in boxes in warehouses for however long, so you just need to make it a little bit more supple and just get a little bit of a bend. So then we've got some front I/O stuff here. I may run the USB 3 one actually from one of the grommets on the side and around, might make it a little bit easier. That's a fairly tough cable to try and get in, so we have to be careful with that one. Yeah, a little bit tricky to work with this case. It just needs a little bit more space where the cables come through at the bottom. If the case was a little bit wider, then the power supply could come a little bit further forward and you could get those cables up there easily, but as it is, it's a little bit too narrow to do that. But the system is complete, so now let's get a power plug in and see if it posts. Okay, so everything's plugged in. I've got a mouse and keyboard and monitor ready to do the power button on the back. Nothing in terms of LEDs yet. 3, 2, 1. Well, RGB to the max. Little full speed ramp up to start with of the fans. Oh, and we're into the BIOS. So I did actually check the components I used for this build before I filmed it. That's why it's in advanced mode, as I've already been in the BIOS. But we're going on to XMP and we'll enable profile 1. Do F10 to save and then exit. And then we shall get an OS installed and do some benchmarks. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start on Halo Infinite because it's one of the newest titles that I have, and a lot of people are going to be wondering what kind of performance they can get for this game. So I'm going to load into a quick play game. I've set everything to high on the preset, turned off VSync. We've got an unlocked frame rate as well, and I've also got frame view up, so we're going to see kind of what frames we're going to be getting. As I mentioned, we're on the high preset. Everything's set to high out of the gate. VSync off, unlocked frame rate. So generally about 110, 120 frames a second we're getting from our 3070, so not too shabby at all. Let's try not to die. Actually, that kind of shows some skill here, maybe. It's been a while since I played Halo, especially on PC. Oh, meleeed him. I just hazarded a guess that pressing F for melee and it works, so not too bad. Thanks, mate. Not too bad actually for my first ever game on Halo Infinite. So this is currently set to medium. We're getting about 140 frames. I would personally choose to go for a lower quality and higher frame rate for this because it's just so fast paced. Of course that's up to you. It still looks very nice on medium though. But yeah, generally sitting around 120 frames, so very nice playable frames, that's for sure. Normally I play with headphones as well, but being this is just literally for like a frame rate demo, I'm not doing that, so it is impeding me. Killed by the boys, so I'm going to leave it there for this one. We'll move on to another game now, but yeah, definitely some good frame rates with Battlefield 5 up to about 140, 150 frames, so certainly very smooth sailing with our 5600X and our 3070. Go on to Far Cry 6. This is currently set to the high preset again. I've got the motion blur turned off, camera shakes full, and then I've got the extended features off. I've said it in the last video, but I'm going to say it again in this one. It is a very nice looking game, Far Cry 6. Averaging 105 frames. A very constant 105 frames as well. But yeah, it is a beautiful game. So we've got a maximum FPS of 114, a minimum of 63, but our average is 101. So again, like the last two benchmarks, we're averaging the 100 frames even on high settings, which is really quite nice. So certainly doing a good job with our combo with the 5600X and the 3070. So on to Dirt 5. I thought let's just go ultra wacky. So I went for the ultra high preset and then also put the ray tracing shadows on as well. So it looks absolutely banging. And again, we're in the high 90s, 100 frames at an average. So that's not great, is it? I don't even know where I'm going. We're still in the 110 kind of area frame rate. So I've Austin Powers it. Again, we're in the triple figures, 100 frames, a little bit higher, 110. So that seems to be a pretty consistent number we're seeing across the board. So very pleased so far. So on to Valorant, we've got a high preset going on. This is what the actual game picked. And we've got VSync off 4 times MSAA. And then we've got AF is at 8 times. So let's go into a little game and see kind of what frames we can expect from this. So still sticking around 300 frames. So, I actually got a kill. I'm impressed. Impressed myself. In the corner. You cheeky. Oh, and I got this last kill as well. Hoorah! There might be a future for me in this game yet. So obviously about 3 times over what we were getting on the last games, but they were a lot more graphically demanding than this one. So something to bear in mind. So finally we've got Apex Legends. This was all preset by the actual game itself, so pretty much cranked actually. Looking at it, got some insane texture streaming details. So much like the previous games, we're getting about 120 frames, 140 there. Yeah, sitting at a very comfortable 140 frames, so it's playing very well, that's for sure. I've also tested Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I was quite curious to see what it would get. We've got a high setting going on and an average of 130 frames, so again we're in the triple figures. A similar kind of frame rate across all the games that we tried. Obviously, be it Valorant's a much higher one, but that's a lot less demanding than some of the other games we tried. And I've also was running my thermals as well during all of this testing, so we can see what we kind of can expect with the 360 cooler. High of 64 degrees, so not too bad at all. And then our Gigabyte 3070 got a high of 66.3. Overall, great little machine. So let's give you a little bit of a wrap up now and give you a few closing thoughts. So as you can see from the benchmarks, this PC is putting out a nice easy 120 frames on 1440p, high settings. Battlefield 5 was the only one I went a little bit further down, but as I said, being something that's as fast paced and action heavy as that, I do prefer to drop the qualities to keep the frame rate nice and high. In terms of the actual components, everything's running very nice and quick. The triple 120 radiator in the front is obviously doing a very good job for our processor, and then the Gigabyte 3070 hitting a maximum of 66.2, so very good for thermal performance. Other components, we've got our NVMe from Patriot that's running really quick for all of our games. Viper Steel RGB memory that's running 3600 MHz on XMP, no problems at all. On the B550 motherboard from Gigabyte, the 5600 of course, and then our 3070 are the main parts of this for all of our games that we've been benchmarking. And as you can see, we've got some really nice frames and quality settings out of it as well. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys, coming along for the build and watching all the benchmarks and stuff at the end. I think it's come out really nice. Let me know what you think down in the comments box below. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to subscribe and ding the bell so you don't miss a video. Big thank you to Cougar Gaming, Patriot and Gigabyte for sending out the parts for this build. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.